continuation here of Newtin versus the Ramadars. Okay. Newton, look out! Sheena vainly shouted on Mutania when a mountain quickly grew up from behind the giant Newton. Right when Newton turned about, Bob grabbed Newton and started bear hugging him. Slosh! Newton made, and the two went tumbling about on the planet's terrain. Newton used all his might and went flipping to the side, sending Bob flying into the sky. But between Newton and the mountain Bob was headed at, Bob suddenly turned into a mountain of dirt and just added more mass to the mountain, kicking up tons of dust into the sky. Newton, again in karate stance, looked about nervously. After a few minutes of getting ready for another bear hug, Newton now knew that the attack was probably never going to happen. So he shot up into the sky and headed toward Fuyu's city, just in case Bob was going to attack it for Newton's attack on the House of Ramada. Sure enough, there, before his eyes, was a tall, jagged mountain forming right on the outskirts of the city. It was building itself up slower than when it attacked Newton, no doubt to help instill terror in the hearts of the city's inhabitants. The people began to scatter in horror, knowing what was about to befall them. Suddenly, right as Bob formed into the angry, scowling 1,000-foot-tall giant that was expected to get that was expected by all, it got a swift kick in the side of the head as Ultramutant Newton knocked it flying into the city, knocked it flying to the side. When Bob got up, a look of shock was in its eyes as it got a lot of fast karate-like attack from Ultramutant Newton. The people in the city, in and around the city, the people in Fuyu's city stopped running and started watching the fight that was taking place out on the outskirts, shaking the city each time shaking the city each time one of the giants hit the ground. When Bob got up, Newton jumped up, spun around, and kicked it in the face, knocking it flying and tumbling again. Newton was trying to keep it from the city. When Bob got up, two swords had formed in his hand, formed where his hands were. It charged at Newton. Newton crossed his wrists and shot Bob with a ray again, blowing a big chunk of dusty matter out of Bob. Bob stopped as the wound healed up, but right when it was healed, Newton staggered it to the face with a punch that was so loud and strong that it seemed to almost knock Bob out. Newton then grabbed it by the beard, pulled it to the side and around, spinning Bob around and around and around by the beard, creating a huge hurricane wind. Newton was planning on sending it further away from the city, but suddenly a horrifying thing happened. The beard snapped in two. The beard snapped in two. Newton cringed with horror to realize that the beard really wasn't a beard, but only looked like one in a kind of alien-generated effect. Instead of Bob flying out of the city, he was now flying into the city as sand that was once beard poured through Newton's giant fingers. Newton quickly and vainly flailed about his arms in embarrassed Ultramutant horror to see Bob tumbling, rolling, and crashing through city skyscrapers. The crew on Mutania gasped. But down on the planet, Newton had no time to feel bad. When Bob staggered up, Newton thought fast and leaped onto its back and tried to pull off its head. Bob tried to slice Newton with the swords, but the sharp part just missed where Newton was. Suddenly, a loud siren sound began to go off. Bob tossed Newton off with ease, sending Newton rolling and taking out a neighborhood. When Newton got up, his warning beacon on his helmet that materialized on his head was rapidly... Suddenly, a loud siren sound began to go off. Bob tossed Newton off, sending Newton rolling and taking out a neighborhood. When Newton got up, his warning beacon on his helmet that materialized on his head as he rapidly grew started making a loud beeping humming sound. On Mutania, the crew talked about how Ultramutant was now losing energy, and if Newton didn't kill Bob soon, he'd be powerless and start to fail, never to rise again. Bob charged at Newton with the swords. Newton crossed his wrists again, but nothing came out. Instead, he got a slash across the chest, making Machina cry out. Yellow mutated blood began to pour from Newton's chest. Newton tried to duck and dodge the blades, but his power was now rapidly fading, and he was getting cut and slashed more and more. Realizing that no more rays would be shooting out of his crossed Ultramutant arms, Newton instead concentrated on trying to avoid the swords, kicking and punching the giant as he dodged to the side. But he was so gangly and uncoordinated due to such a size that he was being cut more and more by the slashing sword of Bob. We have got to get him out of there, shouted a crewman named Sergeant Storm, or it'll be death by 1,000 cuts. I've counted 39 already, said Callisto with concern. A minute more into the fight, and most of the city was destroyed. Newton's warning blinker was sounding full speed. He was now incredibly goofy and awkward looking, and Bob seemed stronger, albeit with a lot of gray in his beard now. Doug Davis, a crewman on Mutania, pointed out that energy readings from the Golden Dome absorber seemed to be diminishing in power. When he reported it to the Mutania crew, Callisto said, "Yes, it seems logical that would happen since it is the one that is creating this giant. But Newton seems to be losing energy a lot faster than it is." The Mutania crew vainly begged at the ship's viewing screen, telling Newton to quit fighting Bob and instead try to escape before it was too late. The swords Bob had became reabsorbed into its body. It was now using strong punches to blast and stagger the giant, weakening Newton in the face before grabbing him by the arm and tossing him onto any tall building that still remained standing, creating massive death and destruction. "There's no way Newton can beat that thing," said Callisto. "It's already over for him. He needs to be removed before he just brings more destruction, as Bob uses Newton's body as a battering weapon on that city." Newton was now so weak he could hardly stand up. Callisto said, "This is going to be a gamble, but we are going to have to absorb some of that energy we put into Newton's body that turned him into Ultramutant." "You mean shrink Newton?" shouted a frightened Sheena. "We need that energy to be diverted to our weapons. Hopefully it will charge up our weapons strong enough to divert Bob, allowing Newton an escape." On the planet, Bob jumped up and delivered a sidekick to Newton's chest, sending Newton crashing through an overpass filled with cars and people that were trying to escape the city. They were so weak from the latest absorption that they couldn't escape from levitation. When Newton staggered up, Bob lifted his fist over his head. The fist turned into a sword again. Right when he was about to swing the sword down and chop Newton in two, Bob's eyes widened as Newton suddenly began to grow smaller when the beam from Mutania came down and struck him. Bob smiled with excitement at his now shrunken opponent. Newton looked about with fear. Suddenly Bob snatched Newton up in his arms and got Newton in a headlock with one arm around his right hand, with one arm, while his right hand turned into a knife. Bob started carving on Newton's throat, making Sheena scream out with horror.